No.
Normally the screen goes to something else when
Is that focused?
it started. We don't have, maybe I should. Whether or not the guy in the room can hear me.
You talk into Mike's collar.
Security. Milner, please.
You have to push the button forward. No, the button.
Oh, this one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I have no idea if the control room can hear me or not, but we're just going to go ahead and get started. I apologize for the change in the room. We didn't find out until 5 minutes to noon, but I'm glad you did all make the trek over here.
You're right.
Once again, my name is Jennifer. I'm faculty member in the School of Urban Studies.
I got one more.
Along with Robert Bertini over in
You're going to have to flip for it.
co-organized this seminar. And I'll put a plug in.
If you want
here.
copies, I can get it to you afterwards.
For speakers for next term or spring term, or if you yourself would like to speak. If you're a MERF student who's finishing up a field area paper, we definitely want to put
We should have put that little slide on the back that has our emails.
Or if you just have an idea,
oh, we can write it
but
on
not a
here.
speaker, that's fine too. We'll perhaps find someone to fill that idea. So on to today. We have with us Mike Hoglund, the Regional Planning Director from Metro, and Ted Liebold, a Principal Planner for Metro, talking about finance. And he is using the camera there.
Well, I'm going to put my email up here.
We are live on the web, though. For those of you out on the web, I don't think we have the email hookup because I don't see a connection in this room for the network. So I apologize if you are trying to email in a question. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. We were asked today to talk a little bit about transportation finance, and it was a challenging PowerPoint to put together. First of all, we weren't going to use a PowerPoint. I told Rob that maybe we could actually a couple of planners try to do a presentation without having to use PowerPoint. And the closer we got to today, the more we realized that it would be totally impossible. So you'll have something to look at other than the two of us. I did, often we'll put a slide at the end of the show that has our emails on there, and I don't think we did that this time. So there's our emails. I know there's both faculty, colleagues, and students in here. We brought about 30 handouts of the presentation, and if you didn't get one, you can email us and we'll send it to you, either hard copy or electronically, if you can take a big file of PowerPoint. So what we wanted to do today, though, was hopefully have everybody walk out of here with a little bit of an understanding of what the federal, state, and local funding sources are, how much comes into the region, how they're allocated, sort of what the needs are for the system, how we allocate our funds at least the metro level, and a little bit of what we can do, what we know about the state, and then also talk about where we're going. We've got a shortfall in the region, and we'll talk a little bit about that for transportation finance, and we'll talk then a little bit about the funding sources that we see being amenable to perhaps being increased, and talk a little bit about innovative finance as well. What's going on out there other than traditional gas tax things, vehicle registration fee, and the type of finance that is used in Oregon for the most part. We're going to conclude then with a handout. Again, we probably won't have enough of a task force that has been appointed at Metro to look at how we might fund our regional transportation plan, and they've got some ideas on finance mechanisms, so we'll give you an update on that activity. And then I think hopefully that won't take the whole time, and at the end we thought we'd open it up for discussion, any questions obviously, but then it's an issue that I think people need to think about, because if you're going to be in planning, your transportation finance and finance in general of infrastructure is always going to come up. And so we'd want to ask a couple of questions at the end. Primarily, where do you think we should go? Do you think there's a problem? what have you guys, what do you know, and how do you think the region might approach transportation finance? Because a lot of it's in the eye of the beholder. Some folks think that transportation is a public good, almost entirely throughout the system, and that it should be paid for through public type of funding mechanisms. And then there are others that think that it should be more on a user pay-as-you-go. There are options for privatizing and things like that. So we want to get into some of that discussion and hear what you might have to say. So just to walk through the presentation, first thing we wanted to do was talk a little bit about what's in the regional transportation plan, so you get an order of magnitude of what we're talking about. We adopted a plan in the year 2000, in August 2000, and it includes 693 projects laid out over the next 20 years to meet the growth and other objectives of the plan. Those projects are, and we'll give you some examples in a minute, are the whole gamut of freeway projects, arterials, bus service improvements, other transit capital like park and rides and shelters and stations and light rail projects and bike paths and trails. This RTP, this Regional Transportation Plan, was the first one where we really we went probably more local than we have before. So you'll see in the plan, if you were to look at the whole list of projects, there's a number of smaller projects that you might say, is that really a metro or a regional project? But we included them because of the 2040 land use plan that says a lot of small little projects in places like centers where you're trying to get mixed-use, higher density development are important. And so they do have a regional importance, and it affects how we fund projects. Those 693 projects add up to $7.6 billion in what we call a priority system. So we did one that was constrained to existing revenue. We forecasted out current gas taxes and likely increases in federal funds, and we came up with a constrained system, and it had about half the revenue that we needed. We have about $3.8 billion of money that we think we'll get over the next 20 years. But the priority system, which was the one that best met our performance objectives, or not the best met, but best met with an eye on what the public's willingness to pay might be, was about $7.6 billion. And then we had a preferred system, which is the one that we tried to match up with performance objectives, and it was about, what was it, $9 billion? So it was a little bit more. But we landed, for obvious public outreach and political reasons, we landed on 7.6. It includes financial options in the plan, but doesn't really have a financial feasibility study, and that was one of the criticisms of our plan when it was done, is how are you going to pay for all this stuff and make up the shortfall? So we punted that into a second phase, and that's one of the reasons that we have this task force out there right now. This is project types and examples of what's in the Regional Transportation Plan, just to give you a flavor of how much things cost and what's in the plan. Obviously, we have a bunch of freeway and highway improvements. They're primarily widening of the existing system, and when we actually do those projects, we need to go in and do a corridor study to find out, are you just going to add a lane, or is it going to be an HOV lane, or is it going to be an priced express lane, a hot lane, if you will? Will there be freight preferential? What's the transit solution in that corridor, et cetera? So we've lined up a number of freeway and corridor studies to figure out exactly what you want to do it, and also come up with a financial plan for each freeway. And I'll show you an example of a financial, at least a chart of a financial plan a little bit later on some of these freeways. But for example, widening I-5, just to eliminate the bottleneck up there near Delta Park and Columbia, is $111 million. We've got widenings on 205, 217, US 26, just about every freeway. 84 is the exception. There's not a lot you can do with 84. There's too much constrained right-of-way there, so you probably won't see it widened for highways or anything else. Just increasing frequency of, operational improvements and transit improvements. On the transit side, we're continuing to march along with Ken Duker's favorite program, our light rail implementation plan. And for example, if you built Milwaukee now to the transit mall and brought it through the center here and then down onto the transit mall. That's about an $816 million project. We have a number of road projects, which are anything from intersection improvements to arterial improvements on the road side. Some of them more expensive, everything from a Twalt and Sherwood Road. If you've ever been on that little section between Twalt and Sherwood, it goes from 5 lanes to 3. To bring that up to 5 lanes across the whole segment would be about, I got to talk faster, that's what I got to do. 32 million, and then we have other projects that are intersection improvements, bike lane, things like that are about $1 million.
So it's on your screen, but not.
Yeah. So I don't know how this thing works. There, right? There's our email. Okay, good. I'll go a little quicker. Federal transportation funding, we have Highway Trust Fund. So from here, we've given you some examples of some projects. And, okay, where do we get the money? They come from a number of sources. And the first one I want to talk about is federal transportation funding. Basically, there's a Highway Trust Fund. There's an overall pot of money that the feds allocate. And it's a highway piece. And then there's a transit formula, which goes to metropolitan transit districts primarily. That's on a formula basis. So depending on the size of your metropolitan area and your number of, basically size, the number of people, you get an allocation. Then there's discretionary funds. That's what we compete for in this region. It's the light rail dollars, and they're usually allocated at about 50 to 60% of the project cost. So that $816 million project, we'd like to get about 400 to 500 of that from federal sources, and then the other from local sources. The Highway Trust Fund is the big pot, however, for roads and other programs, and it's about $25 billion a year at the national level. And it's based on the federal gas tax, which is, I can never remember, 11 cents per gallon, I think, or is it 14? 14. It's 14 cents per gallon. Is that right, Jerry? You might. Yeah, it's about 14. Well, it's 14 plus the 4.3. That's what it is. There's 14 cents that's. Remember why the first Bush wasn't reelected, because he said no new taxes. Then he upped the gas tax by 4.3 cents, and that came back to haunt him. And that was for a budget balancing program, but it actually has been now included in the Highway Trust Fund. And this particular cycle, they're looking at spending more of that money that has been on hold. That's just an accounting trick to make the budget look more balanced at the federal level. The interesting thing about federal transportation is that we're in the reauthorization period right now, and Tuesday's election is going to have an influence on how those funds get, the size of the programs, the type of programs, and the amount and the dollars that will come to various states and metropolitan areas. There will be an impact. For example, Monday before the election, there was some talk, over the previous weeks that the federal gas tax might be indexed to inflation and might be retroactive to 1992, which would provide a lot of money for transportation. After Tuesday, that's not looking as good. So, when you're understanding transportation finance, you have to understand a little bit how the powers that be allocate the money. What Congress does is every 6 years they do an authorization bill, which says here's how much transportation money we want to allocate over the next 6 years. And then on an annual basis, they appropriate the money. They take a look at the budget and overall needs, and they may appropriate 100% of what they thought they were going to, or they may appropriate some lesser amount. If there's a surplus, they might even appropriate a little bit more. Then it gets even more complicated, because not only do they say, okay, Oregon, you were supposed to get $100 million. Well, we'll give you 90 million of it, but we'll only let you spend 80. And so there's an obligation ceiling. So there's 3 things under federal law that someday you'll probably trip up on. One is the authorization. That's the amount you're authorized to spend. It's basically in your wallet. The appropriation is the annual amount that when you take a look at how much should we be spending, that's what Congress says, to kind of keep, maybe you only spend 90 million and keep 10 for later. And then the obligation ceiling is even a more discrete look at what you should be spending every year. And eventually you get to spend that obligation amount and you get to spend your entitled appropriation, but it might spill over into the next bill, and it's really an accounting headache for our analysts that have to keep track of all those things. But anyway, so we're in the period now of a reauthorization, all the programs and dollar sources and the flexibility of the funds, meaning can they be spent on highways and transit or just highways and just transit? Can they be spent for planning purposes? Can they be spent for bikes, paths? All that's being discussed now at the federal level. There's even the Transportation Research Program that Portland State is competing for, a share of that money. So there are niche programs as well. But the source is the gas tax, which is, like I said, 18.3 after I figured it out. And then what the feds do from then is they contract with ODOT and Metro, so that the money is allocated to ODOT and then down to local governments, including Metro and city and counties, to be spent. These are the categories that matter in the Federal Highway Trust Fund. The Surface Transportation Program is, for the metro area, is probably the most important one. It's a large category, and we get about $16 million a year of what we call STP funds come to this region, and we have full discretion, Metro, the council, and our local advisory committee, which is called JPAC, the Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation, that works with our council. They can allocate those funds as they will. And so they're very flexible, meaning that they can be spent on just about anything in transportation. You can build a bike path or a trail, or you can put it towards a freeway for light rail, for planning, for design, for engineering. There's any number of things that those dollars are useful for. And so they're actually quite coveted because they have probably the most flexibility of any funding source, and there's only $16 million to allocate. We've even at Metro funded, bought land and sold it back to developers for transit-oriented development. Not with Surface Transportation Program funds, we could, but we've used the next category, congestion mitigation air quality funds. That's another category that comes to the state, but they've sub-allocated that to the metro area, and it's intended to clean your air and reduce congestion, hence the title. But the projects have to show a benefit to clean air, so they're primarily used for what we call alternative mode programs, TDM programs, bike, ped, things like that. So we focus most of those dollars on those programs, and we get about $9 million a year of CMAQ dollars that come directly to Metro. So that's, and we'll talk again in a minute about those dollars. That's roughly the amount that we get at Metro per year to allocate is $25 million. Other federal programs that are important, there's Bridge for the nation's bridges, and they get allocated through a formula to people who own bridges, states and local governments. Enhancement funds, which is a category actually of the STP program that goes towards enhancing the transportation system. And again, it's very broad in how those funds are applied. It's anything from a rest area to purchasing railroad right-of-way for bike trails to archaeological analysis of impacts of transportation projects. It's kind of a weird little category, and I'm not sure where it came from. The CMAQ program, by the way, was the cloud of the California congressional delegation in the 1991 bill, where they said, we're not getting enough money. So they created a program, but they had the worst air. And so they created a program that said, well, we need to fix air quality. And so along came CMAQ, and the metropolitan area's got that money. There's also safety money, and then there's a category of innovative finance, which I don't think is very innovative, and I'm going to talk about in a second. Okay, then. What's the next slide? Who's got a handout? What's it say? Does it say innovative finance? Oh, okay. So the state then is there we go. The SDP. Oh, okay. Well, I already sort of talked about this. This is the, okay, now we go through the categories. I don't have should have had my handouts in front of me. The STP program, as I described it, is very flexible. We think over the next 20 years, remember I said we had about 3.6 million, 3.8 million of revenue. 475 million of that over the next 20 years will come from this category. And there is some ODOT STP that's spent. So ODOT gets a share of this money, we get a share of this money, and the allocations will be made by Metro and ODOT. I mentioned CMAQ. You have to show a discernible air quality benefit is the key to remember about the CMAQ program. So if you are going to increase auto emissions above a no-build or a base situation, you cannot use these funds for that purpose. We administer those programs. The bridge, I mentioned the key thing here is 118 million will come into the region for bridges over the next 20 years. It sounds like a lot of money, but it's not really when you realize that all the downtown bridges need help. Yes, sir?
Does this include money from Clark County and Vancouver?
No, this is just the Oregon side.
So the bridges that are crossing the Columbia River, that's a totally different issue?
You can use bridge funds through an agreement with ODOT and WashDOT could use these funds on the interstate bridge. Traditionally, though, they would use interstate maintenance funds, which is another category that I didn't mention. There is two other categories, National Highway System and interstate maintenance, which primarily go to keeping the major federal roads of federal importance maintained. That's kind of the problem is that I mentioned the discretionary funding for transit. There's a pot of money for new starts for transit, whether it's commuter rail, even bus rapid transit, or light rail, but there's not a commensurate pot for new starts of highways. So if we don't build a ton of new highways in this region, we've got a couple little segments in our long-range plan, but there's no federal pot of money to go to, so you have to piece together funds in a different manner. The enhancement program, the 10 eligible activities, as I mentioned, some of the archaeological, alternative mode. You can do trails. The East Bank Esplanade, what was it, $1 million a foot project. It was funded in part with federal enhancement funds. We get about 64 that should come into our area over the next 20 years. Safety, there's a statewide database that looks at where you have the worst crashes. And where'd you get that slide, Ted? Okay, innovative finance. The federal, right now at the federal level, there's I probably should have put the fourth bullet up, but I'll talk about it. There's three sorts of general innovative finance tools that they claim they have. And so I go to these, you go to the Transportation Research Board meeting in Washington, D.C., and you go to these sessions and you want to hear all about innovative finance, and all it is a way to borrow money you're already going to get. State infrastructure banks are skim money off of basically other funding sources and put it into a dedicated program for whatever the states want to use that money for. So Oregon does have a state infrastructure bank, but it's not more money, it's just the same money being used differently. So I guess that's innovative. It allows you to do a few things that you might otherwise not do, but it's not really innovative finance. To me, innovative meant, there's a new way to fund things. We're going to be able to leverage private development. There's new financing mechanisms. Yeah.
Well, what's the breakup of transit versus highway fees?
The federal bill is about 35 billion roughly every year goes out to transportation, and probably about 15% is transit, 15 to 20 is my recollection. I was actually looking for that number before I came over here, but I couldn't find my little book. And then I went to my boss's office, and that was even worse. So he's piles all over the place. There's another program called TIFIA, Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act of 1998. Again, what it allows you to do is borrow federal funds and pay them back with some source of local funds that you would you would collect over time. So theoretically, you could it could be fare box revenues if it's a transit project. You could use sources like that to pay back the loan, depending on what the project is. It could be toll revenues, a local toll collection. But again, it's just kind of moving the money around. The other one are Grant Anticipation Act, which came up with this term Garvey bonds, and I can't remember if that's named after someone, a bank, or it's an acronym. But the Garvey bonds are allow you to use your stream of federal funds to bond against a project. And I think Denver is the one area right now that basically they took, the metropolitan area there took almost all of their federal funds over the next 20 years. I think if they used they did a 20-year forecast. It might have been 10. But they've allocated them to a huge transportation project, and they'll use the federal funds to pay back the feds over, and I don't know, there's a very low interest rate, so it is not a bad deal. Well, the interest rates are with the market, so there is a reason why you'd want to do this, particularly at this time, because interest rates are so low, historically low, so you might want to do more bonding now. So I guess that is an innovative tool. If interest rates were high right now, you would not want to be borrowing against your future funds because you'd be paying back more in interest, obviously. So that is a way to get projects funded sooner than later. But again, it's not new revenue. The formula funds that come in to TriMet and SMART, the South Metro, the Wilsonville Transit District, amount to about $642 million, and they are used for there is some capital purchases for bus replacement and things like that. There's not a lot of federal funding that goes into transit. Again, that sounds like a lot, but TriMet's budget now is about $220 million a year, I think. And so divide that by 20, and it's about $12 million a year is going to transit from federal funds. Yes, sir.
Operation has to come from payroll taxes and fare box.
Yeah, TriMet is about 25 to 30% funded through fare box, and probably 10% or less through formula funds, and then 70% through payroll tax, and probably 1 or 2% from other sources. The discretionary program. This is what we compete for on the light rail, and we've done a pretty good job in it, and we hope to continue to do a good job. So we've estimated that of that $3.8 billion, I think it was, that was our 20-year revenue. $1.8 billion of that is anticipated to be transit. When we did our revenue forecast, the rules are basically you have to. You can only forecast funds that you reasonably expect to receive, and so it really constrains your revenue assumptions. So the fact that we think in the next 20 years we'd like to have a toll road or a hot lane or two, which would help generate more revenue, we can't really account for that in our current revenue projections. The State Highway Trust Fund is state gas tax, which is 24 cents, and the weight mile tax on trucks and vehicle registration fee, and any federal grants that go directly into that trust fund. These funds, though, are limited to, probably most of you know this, unlike the STP federal funds that are very flexible, these are required by within the Constitution to be spent within the public right-of-way, and so they ultimately get spent on primarily vehicle capacity for autos and freight, although bike lanes within the right-of-way are eligible, as well are sidewalks. So we do get a lot of bike and sidewalk mileage constructed using the State Highway Trust Fund in association with other projects. Now, at the state level, though, because there hasn't been a gas tax increase in the last 10 years, most of the money that's in the State Highway Trust Fund is going to preservation and maintenance, and only about 8% is dedicated to new capacity at this time. Of the State Highway Trust Fund, 60% goes to ODOT, 24% to counties, and 16% to cities. So there's a formula that was approved by the legislature that allocates the money out this way. There's a need, though, to increase 1 cent per year state gas tax to keep pace with inflation and vehicle miles of travel. So we are collecting a little bit more every year because there's a growth in vehicle miles of travel, but inflation is outpacing the growth in vehicle miles of travel, and the costs are increasing on the system, and so therefore you need about a penny a year just to keep up with existing revenues. And we haven't had an increase in 10 years, although there was a increase in the title transfer fee, which funded some capital at the last legislative session, about $600 million statewide. The statewide trust fund then of the state dollars receives about $620 million a year. So in the legislative biennium, if you hear transportation discussed, it'll be about $2.3 billion for the biennium that the legislature and ODOT and the Oregon Transportation Commission will be their amount. And of that, remember 40% goes to city and counties. Some of it goes to DMV. Some of it goes for engineering, design, administration. And then whatever's left, and it's not a lot, goes back into the system. And then of that, most of it's going for preservation and maintenance. The STIP is the program where the state allocates funds. Hopefully most of you are familiar with that. It stands for the State Transportation Improvement Program. It's a 6-year document, something like that. Anyway, that where they allocate the dollars by project around the state. And so you look in the STIP, and it's got every project the state is planning on doing over the next 6 years, and it's laid out by type of money, the year it's going to be built, and the phasing of whether it's in design, whether they're purchasing right-of-way or they're doing construction, or all three of those things, and the year that that's going to happen. And then remember the state money and then the federal dollars all come together in that document, and it reconciles all those dollar amounts. Back to our funds, the Metro Transportation Improvement Program is the cousin to the STIP. It's called the MTIP, and it's how we allocate funds. It's those STP and CMAQ funds that I talked about. We also do a conformity report. We do an analysis. There's a number of rules that we have to follow, and one of them is meet the Clean Air Act. So there's a conformity determination that goes into the STIP. When I see conformity, that's what I think of. It means that the projects we're going to build won't worsen air quality. So anything, because we're an attainment area under the Clean Air Act, or a maintenance area, excuse me. We used to have a problem. We'd violated the standard in the 70s and 80s. Cleaner cars, shorter trips, mostly cleaner cars. We've been able to get out, and cleaner fuel. We've been able to now attain the clean air standards, but we still have to make sure that we're not going to fall back into bad air. And we update that every 2 years. Local funds, there's a number of local funds, and maybe won't do them justice today, but there's a lot of them. And this is where you actually get a little more innovative, I think. The cities and counties are coming up with all these, well, maybe too innovative, one might argue. They have a number of niche fees and taxes that they pursue. They get their state trust fund allocation of the 24 or 16%, whether they're a city or county. But they also use tax increment financing. That's a major player in downtown Portland, for example. And that is it's the margin, it's the amount of taxes that are generated from development in an area go back into that area as opposed to being spent in the rest of the city. So it's controversial, but it does provide a real boost in those tax increment areas. They're supposed to be, theoretically, they were originally urban renewal areas, and arguably some have been renewed, right, Jerry? But nonetheless, that is a method of getting transportation projects built. So, for example, part of the strategy on the South Corridor alignment to down 205, one of the legs is going from Gateway to Clackamas Town Center. You would use tax increment districts both at the town center in Lentz and Gateway to help fund part of that project. Local improvement districts are similar, meaning that there's a, but it is additional money. It's an area, downtown has a local improvement district here. A lot of the amenities on the light rail line were funded from the local improvement district. So the downtown businesses agreed to assess themselves a certain amount of money, goes into a pot and goes for capital improvements. Parking fees, there's the city of Portland, for example, does, you have to pay for parking, and some of those fees go into projects and other programs. The TDM program at the Lloyd District is funded by the parking meter revenues that are generated from the Lloyd District, so they pay for that program that way. Then they also do their own bonds and levies. Washington County probably has the best program for transportation. It's their Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program. It was a general obligation bond that they would go out with every few years. It's now been, because of Measure 50 that was passed a few years ago, somehow it turned into a levy, and so it's a steady stream of dollars, which can go for anything that Washington County wants to use it for, but their board has determined that they want to keep it for transportation. So they could use it for parks, they could use it for school, I don't know about schools, but they could use it for sewers, police, but they use it for transportation. And then transit districts, TriMet, the payroll taxes and the fare box revenues we mentioned. So how much money do we spend in this region every year? Thought this might be interesting. If you can't see it, there's about $630 million that are spent every year on transportation. And that includes about 25% of that goes to capital, 35% is transit operations, and 36% is road, highway, bridge maintenance. So I mentioned TriMet's budget's about $220 million. A lot of that goes for operations, and it's reflected in this chart. And we use this chart for explaining our little $25 million a year that Metro gets. And so that's what that little piece of the pie is up there. That's 4%. That's the amount of flexible dollars that are available. So everything else is more or less earmarked, with the exception of a little bit of ODOT money, about 16 a year, maybe 16 million a year, and then our 25 million. So we're not working with a lot right now. You take that last chart and remember whatever it was, 25% I think was capital, plus our 4% is about $180 million goes to capital. The maintenance, street sweeping, snow removal, just running the buses, paying for the drivers, and all that stuff was included in the other chart. This is just capital. So road, highway, bridge, major preservation projects, and modernization is 46%. Transit capital, mostly the light rail, interstate max, things like that, is 26%. Local flexible funds, their tax increment districts, the stuff that the City of Portland does is about 14% of that, and then our flexible funds is about another 14%. And we use that slide again to show you that there's not a lot of flexible funds out there. So you really get to fighting over the scraps on the flexible funds. We've programmed our flexible funds since '92 when we first got them through 2005. And we put this one in here, so how do you spend those dollars? And we've spent a lot on transit. Primarily, in order to put together the light rail projects, we've taken about $6 million a year in an ongoing stream that has gone to TriMet to help fund first the west side and then the interstate max. And we anticipate using some of that for the South Corridor project as well. We've done about 11% of our projects have had a direct freight benefit, 29% are general road, highway type projects. Boulevards are our new category from a few years ago, where we try to liven up an arterial in a mixed-use center to put a lot of bells and whistles on it to make it more aesthetic for people who might actually want to go to that place. So instead of designing your typical arterial with wide travel lanes and narrow sidewalks, you go the other way. You have wider sidewalks, curb extensions, ornamental lighting to make the place nice. So if you know our 2040 plan, we have downtown Beavertons and Greshams and Lake Oswego's, and when you get into those downtowns where people want to actually go as opposed to plowing through, you slow the traffic down and make the road a little bit better for transit users and pedestrians, and you have store frontages up to the street, things like that. 12% has gone into bike and ped projects. TOD is our transit-oriented development, the buying properties I mentioned, and then TDM. And then in 1991, when the bill was passed, they gave us a whole MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, including Metro. They gave us a bunch of new requirements. And we said, well, how do you want us to pay for all that? Because we used to just do an RTP and an MTIP, and then they want us to look at land use and do freight planning and air quality analysis. And they said, use your STP dollars. So that's why that's why there's a Metro planning slice in there. We did this chart to show, so how are we doing? Remember, we had a shortfall of about $3.8 billion over 7.6, and this is a chart where we said, okay, if we were to spread the need out over 20 years, we would have to be spending approximately $190 million on roads and highways every year to keep up with our plan, about $150 million on transit, and down in the 10 to 20 million range for ped, bike, and boulevards. And so that's the bars on the left. The bars on the right show how we've been doing. So we're tracking our performance on implementing our regional transportation plan, and we're falling behind. Why do we have a shortfall? This chart or graph is something we've used in the RTP, so it's getting a little dated, but the numbers probably aren't getting any better. We used to collect, in real dollars, 2.6 cents in 1970 for every mile driven would come to the state or local government or some public agency to plow back into the system. Today we get about 1.3 cents in real dollars, and that's because of the fuel efficiency and inflation. Now, thank God for SUVs, so there's more money rolling in. This chart shows how do Oregonians, how do they feel about investing in their transportation system? And we're the lowest. We have the highest gas tax, and you hear that all the time. Well, geez, Oregon's got the highest gas tax. But we've got a wimpy vehicle registration fee, which is this little chart here. And we don't have any, there's no sales tax when you buy your car that's plowed back into transportation, or is there dedicated sales tax, which a number of the other states use for transportation improvements. Now, we still need to do this work, because in all honesty, it's not as bad as this looks, because some of the other states, for example, collect a sales tax and it goes into their general fund. Also, and we should probably figure that out, but we haven't had time. The other thing about this is that they also fund other things that are semi-transportation related that we don't. I don't know if Idaho does it, but let's pretend they do because they've got the biggest bar. I don't think all that money is going into their transportation system. Some of it might be paying for roads into park systems, or it might be paying for state police enforcement and things like that. Oregon used to use our share of the gas tax to pay for state police, for example, and we don't do that anymore. So you can do that. So the numbers aren't entirely comparable, but we're not collecting very much is the point of that, and I know we're spending less than just about everybody else. So what can be done? We're working with the federals, with our federal delegation on reauthorization. There's a state legislative session coming up. There's our task force, which we're going to talk about. There are local initiatives that come up all the time. I think Tiger just had something on the ballot. King City. I was looking at the election results the other day, and I saw a King City transportation thing go by. I had no idea what it was, but a lot of local governments are trying to tack on a utility fee to your. Tualatin does this already in Wilsonville. There's like $1 or $2 a month on your utility bill that goes to sweeping streets, and then so they collect that money, and then they can use some of their gas tax money for other purposes. And then there's true innovative finance. Darn it. This was probably the most important slide. No. The point of this slide is the numbers probably don't mean a whole lot. But what ODOT did a few years ago, and we've sort of updated a little bit, was we had three major new freeways in our plan, or were being discussed for our plan. And they said, well, how do you build a freeway anymore? There's no interstate system. There's no Eisenhower. There's no, money that came to build the interstate system like there was back in the late 50s and early 60s. So they looked at a number of options on how you might do that. And this is just a tip of the iceberg list of how you might piece together dollars to do a major project where there's not a big source of funds. So, for example, the Tualatin and Sherwood connector is a bypass route around Tualatin and Sherwood between 99 and I-5. It's about 5 miles long. The cost now is actually up to $330 million. And then we ran some numbers and tried to figure out, due to price elasticity, how much might you collect from tolls. So you slap a price on there and everything else is free. You don't get a lot of money. You end up collecting about $27 million.
That's an annual figure?
No, that was a 20-year. I think that was amortized over 20, based on an opening of about year 2000. One of the things we're trying to get a handle on with pricing is when you actually price. When's the road ripe to be priced? And it has to be pretty congested before you want to price it, or people will find an alternate route, or they'll just deal with congestion. Our policy in our region is we'd like to do something where you price it or toll it, but for the most part, unless it's a key bottleneck like the interstate bridge, there may be a toll on there for everybody. But the strategy has been to maintain some free lanes so that people don't have to pay. It's an equity issue that elected officials haven't really grappled with yet. So they say, okay, go ahead and put a price lane on there, an express lane, but let's keep some free lanes. So you get $27 million from tolls. Not sure if you varied it by time of day. I think when we did this run, we didn't use our pricing model. You could do a local improvement district in that area, so we estimated how much could be generated from the businesses down there. A transportation impact fee on development that could be collected over 20 years might raise $30 million. On and on. So you could do Garvey bonding, the TIFIA, and things like that. You could also, the one that I think is innovative is the TIF, the Transportation Impact Fee. So you're trying to leverage the benefit of the access to development that might occur. I'm not an expert in that area, but I did hear a presentation one time, and the thing that I remembered from that is that the value of the land is low, and then you put in the transportation impact, and it increases almost overnight. And so you have to be, and if you try to capture that value too late, you've missed your opportunity. And so the way it was explained is that you have to get your fee in place early on to capture that value. Now, when I thought about it after that, I thought, well, you could keep the fee for subsequent development that might occur out at this end of the chart. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not an expert. But there are some opportunity costs associated with how you implement some of these things. But again, the idea of this whole slide is just to show you that there's really not any one fee anymore that you can build a freeway project on, or a major capital project. Although the legislature this next session is going to be looking at some things along those lines. And I don't think we have it on an upcoming slide, Ted, but I wanted to, there's a number of things I didn't talk about here that are in the state's purview, but Rob said to do metro transportation. But there are things like VMT fees being collected through GPS that there's a state task force chaired by, I guess he's now a senator, he was a representative, Bruce Starr, and they're looking at innovative finance methods, and I think PSU's been helping with some of the research on that, and so I'll let them explain that later. But there are more finance mechanisms out there. So we have a transportation investment task force right now that I said, remember we had a shortfall in the regional transportation plan. Their job is to develop a list of priority projects, develop new funding sources, and then identify a funding and implementation strategy. And that's what we're going to talk about next, real quick. They've been asked to put together a funding package of about $750 million. You're going to have to probably share. Yeah. Of which about $250 million would be for transit improvements, $250 for highway, and then $250 for arterial and other community type projects. And they've been working on a list of projects, and it includes all the usual suspect roads. On the freeway side, it's 217, 205, some of the major bottlenecks, I-5. You guys might have to share there. Then, sorry. So anyway, they've been looking at a list of projects, but more importantly is, okay, how do you pay for them? And this is a memo that they did a month ago to the task force. Broke into a couple of subcommittees, one to look at projects and one to look at finance. And the job of the finance subcommittee was to come up with how do you raise $750 million. And so on the back, there's some recommendations for what they've tried to do. So when they took a look at some of the highway, and this is, let's see, this is, see. Okay. This is intended to be a 6-year program that would be implemented. Oh, I guess we can do that, can't we? No, it's right here. Oh.
Doesn't seem to want to focus.
Anyway, I just put it down here for my own use. The idea is to maybe put something out to the voters in 2004 and then get everything constructed by 2010. Washington County and others, areas around the country, have been successful in saying, here's a list of projects, we'll get them built by X date, and if you deliver and then you build goodwill with the voters, then you might be able to go out again. So this is the $750 million would be a 6-year program intended to be implemented by 2010. And but the revenue stream might go for about 20 years. So, Jerry, again, I'm not sure on this. This was done by our consultant, and tolls were seen as something that might be supplemental to any particular project. And so it remains to be seen how much you would need from tolls. So I wouldn't go too far on this list as to what tolls would bring a package of projects. But the ones that they've been landing on, the committee liked a lot, was a 1% vehicle excise tax on vehicle sales. So every time you sold your car or bought a new car, so it would be new and used, there would be a 1% charge on that. So, for example, if you buy a $20,000 vehicle, it would be a $200 hit. And so you could incorporate that $200 if you're paying it off over 4 years like most people do a car. It's not that big of a deal. And it raises $500 million. So that's the one that they are recommending at this time be considered to fund the highway portion of the program. On the transit side, the one they kind of liked, but I think they're backing away from, would be a parking fee on. Or some sort of an access fee, actually, is where it might evolve to. So there would be in order to just access property, either by parking or walking, there would be some level of a fee. When we thought about this a little bit more, the first thing is, okay, we'll charge, what was it per month on the parking space? $2, I think, on a parking space, which adds up if you're Fred Meyer, and they're on the task force, and so now you can see why they're backing away from this fee. But for example, one thing you could do, we tried to show them that you could maybe on your sales slip have I think it came out to like less than a penny on every transaction at Fred Meyer would cover their cost and actually put a little bit in their pocket if you didn't want to make it revenue neutral. But they didn't really go for that. And then when we thought about it some more, also I was going to mention that what if you walk to Fred Meyer, and a lot of people do. So then we thought, well, maybe we should use this money to fund some sidewalk and bike improvements as well. So it was from a bureaucratic standpoint, it was a good source of revenue. Is it the best source? I don't know. I'm not an economist. So that was another thing that they looked at, but I think they're drifting towards the usual suspects, general obligation bonds for transit to fill the gap that you don't get with the federal funds. But they looked at a number of fees. We actually have probably about 3 times as many that they consider, and these are where they're landing. Where we're at now at that task force, just FYI, is that we're going to take these fees and a number of others and the projects, and we're going out with a scientific survey to find out how folks might react to, would you support this list of projects, yes or no? There's a number of push questions in there that would say, well, if you took these types of projects off, would you then support it, or if you added, these bells and whistles? So you need to find out what the people actually vote for, and I mentioned I'm not an economist, and neither is a lot of the public. So it's always interesting to see what people will actually pay for, as opposed to what their economic self should be paying for. For example, in San Jose, we looked around the country to find out who has been having successful transportation measures, and I think they went out with a 1% sales tax increase. And they did 7 surveys before they landed on what they were actually going to send out to the voters. So they honed it down every time, because when they actually went to the polls, they wanted to get a win. And one of the surveys, they found, I think it was late in the game, that anybody from San Jose or South Bay down there? Okay. Is there a lot of fog down there? See, I never...
Outside of the city, yeah.
Yeah. Apparently, one of the things that sold was putting the reflectors on the fog lines. So when you're driving along, so they said on all these major highways, we're going to go in and put the reflectors on the fog lines. Not really expensive, but it got them, BART to the airport, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so everybody went, yeah, God, we really like those reflectors, and so they voted for this whole package. Yeah, I know. So that we're trying to test some things like that. So better striping, reflective striping, things like that. So we're trying to figure out what's the fog reflectors in Oregon that'll make a transportation package pass. Yeah, Jennifer.
Would the parking space require a general vote, or would that be who has to approve these things? I guess is my question.
That's a good question.
A vote of the people, but some of them.
Well, for example, Metro has a cap on how much money we can collect in a year. So, and it's like $16 million. It's not a lot from the various fees, and so we couldn't do it. TriMet has the authority on some of them, and the finance subcommittee, they got a report on that, and I can't remember them all. But where the task force landed was there's probably not any of these things that we would try to do that we wouldn't refer to a vote. Because if we don't refer them, they would just get referred through the initiative process, most likely. Now, there is a strategy now that, given some of the problems that Sizemore's had, that you might want him to refer. So it becomes a transportation versus Sizemore issue, and you might actually do better if it's what do you think of our issue? So that remains to be seen how that all plays out. So that's basically our presentation, and one of the things we wanted to know, as I said, was is there anything here? Well, do you have any questions? Number one, and then second, what advice do you have for us on the types of funds that you think we should pursue? I guess the first question is do you think we should pursue anything? I didn't spend a lot of time talking about, we didn't have bring in all of our slides about the maintenance curve, and you got to pay me now or pay me later, and the cost of fixing a road gets more expensive, and we don't have the chart in here that shows in constant dollars the cost of like aggregate and home electronics are coming down. Aggregate and asphalt and labor is going up, and so everything's costs more than it used to, number one. The system's falling apart. Okay, now I'm making this plea. all that stuff that was built in the 50s and 60s is now needing seismic upgrades and fixing and overlays and preservation, and that's where most of the money's going. We haven't got new money to keep up with inflation. So I guess one of the questions is, do you think there's a problem? And if you do, any advice on where we might head? And I know Jerry and Ken probably have some good ideas, and now they're difficult. That's the problem. But I'll start over here.
Yeah, I was just curious if you say that one of the next steps for this task force is to go out and do a scientific survey. Other than like the listening posts and things the Metro has done on a regular basis, what kind of public feedback or survey do you have to refer to as far as what people think problems are or what should be allocated where?
Well, we do a baseline survey every 5 years. And the last 2 times we've done it was last year and maybe it was 97 and 2000, early 2002 or late 2001, roughly every 5 years. And we asked some of the same questions so you can see how people's opinions are changing over time. And one of the questions we ask is, if you had $1 to spend on transportation, how would you spend the money? And it's an open-ended question where they can say, I'd spend it all on light rail, or I'd spend it all on highways, or I would break it into these chunks. And so then Davis and Hibbets have done it for us the last 2 times. And so we've gotten back roughly a dollar. We've got a slide that shows $1, and it's like 25% for roads and 24% for light rail, and I'm going to run out of percents, but it's 16% for bus and 14% for arterials, and then 7 or 8% for bike, and it's almost like our. And then I've done this before too. We've got a pie chart that shows the projects in our plan relative to how people wanted their dollar spent, and it almost matches up. And it was pretty coincidental. We didn't mean it, but I was looking at the 2 one time, and I said, "Oh, I could use this." And so. I have when we've gone out for presentations. So they've told us that they want an array of projects. Then we also have asked them in the last survey on the transfer. So we have to ask them about all sorts of things about growth management and natural resources. It's a Metro survey, recycling, and we make the recycling department. They have more money than us, so they pay for the survey. So we got to ask those questions. So we ask about. Do you think there's a transportation problem? And it's like 42-41. 42 say, yeah, we got a problem. 41%. When you just ask them cold, say we don't, and then the rest are undecided. So Adam Davis has given a presentation to one of our advisory committees, and he looked at those 2 slides and said, well, they want to spend the money all over the place, but you've got less than 50% think you've got a problem. You've got a big problem. It says you should be doing something, but you won't know what to do. And so that's why we got this task force, and we're trying to hone in on these surveys. Jerry, did you have a question?
I guess a couple things. I wanted to make sure that I understood the toll thing on the 3 highways. If I understood what you said, you're saying basically these are the toll revenues that would be collected over a very long period of time, but only if you're tolling 1 lane and you've got 2 lanes are free, sitting right next door. So you're probably only collecting money on those toll lanes during rush hours.
Yeah.
Because why would you buy something when it's being given away next door for free? And the other question I had was, this is more of a question now, is that the traffic relief option task force came with a recommendation, which I believe was adopted by the council, which said that future expansions had to at least consider peak hour pricing for new capacity. Did that come into play with the interstate bridge discussion, or?
It'll come into play in the DEIS phase coming up, and it's likely that anybody who's talked about a new bridge capacity there says it's going to have to be tolled, and it'll be looked at variably priced as well.
But what about the widening at Delta Park?
I don't think that qualifies as a. It's just a $111 million project, Gary. I don't think. I don't. I don't know. That's a good question, and you should probably stay on top of this. They want to make it HOV, and anytime you're HOV, you're ripe for hot as well. So I don't know where they're going with that. They haven't. There's a I-5 trade corridor that came up with a package of improvements on I-5 from the Fremont Bridge to 99 or the 205 junction in Clark County, and they have a number of projects around the bridgehead, truck, actually rail freight, arterial, freeway, and bridge things. And it's just been adopted. And the next step is to push out this I-5 Columbia Lombard project, Columbia to Delta Park. And so they've got to scope it out and figure it out. So hopefully it will be looked at. I thought you were going to ask about 26 because they're going to be widening the Sunset Highway out to, they're building all that stuff at Sylvan and then down to 217. And then ODOT got another small piece of funding to get it out to Murray. And so our feeling was we talked about whether we should look at that as a price lane, but it was too short of a segment, so we kind of let it slide. And then the next thing you know, now they're going Murray to Cornell. So
If you'd known that.
That's why, and that's why we're trying to do these corridor studies, which lay out what's the total improvement for the facility, how do you fund it, and what's the phasing. And when you figure all that out, then you know if you can go ahead and do a pricing component. So there's a couple opportunities lost. Yes, sir.
You talk about the thing which here, the rail transit. A lot of studies talked about the rail transit as, why would you like to fund more rail transit?
Why would we want to do more light rail transit?
Yeah. Like the other projects on rail transits have been debated a lot, that they are only some kind of transfers from the ridership from the buses and these things. Like, why would you like to go to all these funds in transit? Even it's debated by a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's the key word. It's debated by a lot of people. So there's two sides of the debate. Our feeling is that the fixed rail system generates more ridership, and you provide a certainty for the land use that develops within those corridors. We think rail's doing pretty good. For example, in the Banfield corridor right now, it carries about 25% of the person throughput in the peak hour. So, you'll hear statistics from certain people that will say, well, there's only 5.6% of the ridership in the regions on transit, so why should you invest in it? Well, if you look at the peak times and the peak corridors, transit's carrying a much larger share and will carry a larger share. Also, again, the word's debate, so I'm sounding like I'm debating here. But you don't need parking at other ends. Always, you might have some park and ride, but the transit. So we like a multimodal transit system with bus, light rail. We're even looking at BRT in corridors now. Yeah.
Wouldn't the bus rapid transit save us a lot of these investments?
Yeah.
Wouldn't save a lot of
Yeah, and so the corridors that we're looking at in the future will have a bus rapid transit option that we'll be looking at. So, and we're anxious to see what the Eugene system looks like. So, I think in Portland, the idea was to get some fixed rail system down, and you could argue whether we've gone too far or not. But I think the fact that it's a high quality piece of transit kind of gets your foot in the door, gets people used to the system, using transit. So, that's the decision that's been made here. Yeah.
When deciding whether to widen roads, how much do you take into account the aspect of reduced demand and more people using it if you have more capacity? And is it really effective to widen roads?
When we did the regional transportation plan, we had some alternatives that people said, can you accommodate traffic or mobility and access through alternative modes? And so we did a limited capacity increase. We didn't widen highways. We put as much service increases into transit as we could. We did things like had free parking, like fareless squares in all the regional centers. We try to come up with as much connected system as possible so that people can walk to transit. So we really, to see how much we would get. And then we looked at the performance of the highway system. And before then we said, okay, you've got really bad corridors here where even this much transit won't help. But we still use that level of transit and then size the system for the roads accordingly. So that's why you don't see 84 widened and a lot of things that we could have done. So that's basically how we went about it. Yeah.
What
How many people, how many agencies finance transportation projects? Oh, transit. Well, there's the federal dollars.
But what
TriMet. Yeah, but us also. We provide some money of the federal funds that come to Metro. We turn around and kick those over to TriMet for some of their transit. We've paid for park and ride lots, light rail, and last time we gave kind of a bucket allocation of a couple $1 million to do station improvements. Try to get the transit tracker stuff up so you get real-time transit, things like that. Yes?
Do you have any funds in reserve for areas that are about to be brought into UGB?
No, that's a good question, though. What we did in this allocation was once you come into the UGB, the next step is to do a concept plan, and that basically says how much productivity there will be for housing and jobs and gives general locations of where those housing and jobs will be and defines a transportation network, the roads and streets and things like that. So once you have a completed concept plan, you're ready to go to try to get infrastructure in there, and the local governments then do the zoning and subdivision and all that sort of stuff, and development can happen. So the only area right now that has a completed concept plan that's of any significance is Pleasant Valley, which is the area north of the area we're thinking of bringing in now, the Damascus area. It's out there by Happy Valley, Pleasant Valley, and Damascus. And so Pleasant Valley, we said if you have a completed concept plan that you're eligible. So they're going to come in with a couple of key projects we anticipate. But we don't have anything specifically set aside. And we couldn't, because the needs inside the boundary are actually greater than they are, or as great in most areas as they are outside, because most of the growth is going to be still inside the boundary. So, yeah.
Other than the I-5 task force, what kind of cooperative planning happens between Washington and Oregon for the Vancouver, for us as a region, as a greater region, as a bi-state region?
Well, there's a bi-state committee. There's three things. There's I mentioned JPAC, Joint Policy Advisory Committee on Transportation. They have 3 seats that include representatives from Clark County and City of Vancouver. So they're over here at our policy meetings, and then there's a reciprocal piece on their policy board. So we've got a Metro councilor and one of the Portland City Commissioners and ODOT are on their policy board. So we know what's going on. And then there's a bi-state committee that meets about every month, and they talk about mutual issues of interest on transportation. They've actually widened that now to land use. So they're going to talk about, access, still sort of in the venue of transportation, but how can you use land use to preserve the transportation system? So interchange access, interchange area management plans that ODOT has adopted. Washington's interested in those, and coordinating on growth, industrial job locations and things like that. Yeah.
Does the I-5 corridor study include a plan for light rail?
Yes. The plan is to push it across from where the interstate ends at the Expo Center up to one of those SRs up there, SR 500 over to 205 and then down to Gateway.
So they're not actually talking about another line to run parallel to interstate? Because I've seen some older plans that were suggesting that might happen.
No. Personally, I think there's too many stations. The city of Portland always has too many stations. But there was a question. April?
I have a question going back to federal funding. Earlier now referred to the next transportation funding bill as green funds. And I'm wondering, especially thinking of Pleasant Valley and potential other greenfields will be developing environment-specific areas, what opportunities there might be for funding of these streets within any transportation bill. Could there be something coming out of that with the earmarked dollars? Or has there been a discussion of it yet?
I'm trying to remember. We have a paper that we've developed, and it's got a lot. It's a draft right now, and it calls out that we want to preserve all these programs, the CMAC, the STP, and new starts, and there's small starts, and we supported the PSU research thing. And Bob, you may have read it more recently than I did. I know the issue of endangered species came up, and if there are, expanding the enhancement program, that archaeological sort of a thing to include some thing for endangered species. And so in our area, we'd like to replace all the culverts that are blocking stream passages where appropriate. So I'd have to get back to you on that one. I'm trying to remember. There are some things I know we were talking yesterday that you don't want to bring up or you'll lose almost. And I won't tell you what those are. Ken? Yeah, I'll get Nick, you next.
What is, if you had a chance to talk to your counterparts in Washington about the resounding defeat of their transportation initiative?
No, but I don't like it. Yeah. Well, it was only 65-35. If you remember, whatever that nickel gas tax was over here a few years ago, it was like 88-12, which I have this theory. I'll try to get through it real quick. It's the thirds theory. There's a third on the right that always will vote for something, and there's a third on the left that always won't vote, or vice versa. And then so you're always working with the third in the middle. And so on the Washington measure, if the third, you got your 33%, they only got 2% of the middle. So they lost 31-2 is the way I look at it. So I don't even know what that says about the old Oregon measure, where we lost the third support that usually is going to vote yes on any funding measure. So it's pretty.
The raw numbers indicate they probably should have done it more regionally rather than statewide.
Yeah.
But it also, even within Puget Sound, it went down, which is kind of funny.
Well, that was their big problem was Puget Sound wants everything, and so if they don't get everything, then they get. And then the other thing is you always have the highway versus transit versus green versus business, and to get that right mix of projects is very difficult to get voter support. What I think is going to happen here is the next Oregon legislature will get some increase in the vehicle registration fee to fix the bridges on I-5 and I-84. So that's like $1 billion or $1.8 billion. I can't remember what the number is. But all those bridges that are wearing out because they picked that wrong design. And they might get a little bit extra for locals for preservation and maintenance. And it'll go under the radar of the bigger issues down in Salem with school funding and stuff like that. And then we'll have to go out with our measure and lose 65-35. I don't think on the vehicle registration fee. I think the bridges, they've sort of come to a truce on that. But anything more, it would be. He's mentioning the truckers want to go to a diesel tax instead of paying the weight mile for a number of reasons. They claim it's revenue neutral, but I imagine they actually would get a break, or they wouldn't be fighting so hard. But it's also cumbersome to keep track of all that stuff, too. Yeah?
I had a question about that vehicle, that VAT fees. Can you tell me more about that? I don't know how that works. VAT fees.
Well, the idea would be that you pay based on the amount that you drive. And so your odometer would be tracked GPS-wise.
So it's not implemented yet?
No,
Okay.
no. And so there's a task force looking at it, and there's a cost of $200 or $300 to add the GPS unit. And it would be able to track where you're going. So if you're driving to Disneyland, for example, and you're in California, you wouldn't be charged for those miles. So it would only be for Oregon roads, essentially. So that's about all I know about it. And I think there's some graduation to it. So there might be an incentive clause that they're considering. So if the first 7,000 miles or something is a cheaper rate, and then if you go above that. But then there's people that go, well, I got to drive for a living. There's sales, and so I don't know how that is getting played out.
We can put it on the agenda for next quarter.
Yeah, bring Jim Whitty up here.
We have to cut it up because we're at 1:30. And if there's additional questions, talk to you individually or email.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ted. Ted didn't get to say a lot, but this was all his stuff. So, the man behind the curtain.
And any of the students that are registered with me who didn't speak up,
You're fired.
That's another meeting. So you can either quickly hand it to me or email it to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
That's-
Thank you.
It was,
Your part was